Welcome to Transforming Us podcast. I'm Jess.
And I'm Tamara. We're trauma-informed relationship coaches and old friends here to discuss common patterns and what leads us to paths of security.
You know, people are feeling overwhelmed and disconnected in their painful relationships, which often leads to mental health crises.
We want to share some new ideas and practices to help you cultivate curiosity, compassion, and to redeem the patterns in your relationships, starting with yourself.
Join us on this journey of transforming us. Grab a cup of coffee and let's dive in.
So in the last episode, we explained how attachment is formed and the importance of a caregiver helping a child constantly feel seen, soothed, safe, secure, and basically heard too. Not perfectly, but all around half of the time, this is what produces secure attachment. So I'm excited about talking about this today. But first, how are you doing, Jess?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm feeling very rested and very present. So I'm excited about that. It's not always the case, but
yeah. Well, good. I'm glad you're feeling rested. That is important.
Yeah. So you have some news, don't you?
I do. I'm actually very excited. I just finished 2 weeks ago, completely got certified for relationship and life coaching. And that feels like a nice accomplishment to celebrate.
Yeah.
And I'm just excited about, I'm just so passionate about these topics and people and excited to work with you. And I'm excited.
Well, you've worked so hard and learned so much. And I'm just feel so honored to just do life with you and get to have these conversations.
Aww.
It's really fun.
It is.
It's nice to have a person who meets you on that level, because not everybody, wants to sit around and theorize about different psychological things and, just get into the nitty gritty of relationships.
Yeah, it's true. And I've just been so thankful for you because I love us just being able to be passionate about this topic together. And I feel like we spur each other on. I learned so much from you too. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, the most important thing is it has transformed our relationships,
Yeah.
I can think about all the many conflicts that my husband and I have. I mean, just recently, really kind of being triggered around our own needs and just a desire to be heard. And, like you mentioned in the beginning, not only do children want to be seen, soothed, safe, secure, like us as adults, like we so need that from our partners, that knowing that they're going to listen to us and they're going to attune when we're asking for something. And that was a recent thing. It was just like, I am communicating something and I don't feel heard, and then it just becomes a thing because he's trying to hear me.
Right.
My husband, Travis, is doing his best with what he knows to respond. And a lot of times, it could look like a reaction, or I'm reading facial expressions and then we're having to then unpack the patterns of what happened, take turns listening to one another. And it just goes to show that it doesn't matter how much work you do learning this information, that you still have to show up and pay attention and self-regulate and use the tools and continue to heal, continue to grow, because there's no arriving.
Right. That's
There's no
true.
point at which you're done.
Right. It is true. And it's challenging, when you have two people and, as much as we've talked about Enneagram numbers and attachment style, it's like, you have people coming from two different numbers and two different styles. It's like the way they see life is different than how you can. So it's learning how to, it's like a process and a dance with the people in your life.
Yeah, I love
spouses.
That. I love the dance language. So let me ask you, when do you feel like you remember first learning about attachment theory and recognizing that you might have some insecure attachment?
So I took some psychology courses in college, and I was just very drawn to learning about it. Like I looked forward to those classes. And I remember hearing about, some of the attachment things. I was at a younger age, so it's like my brain at that point wasn't fully developed yet. So I feel like I didn't quite embrace it like I have at this point in my life, because I've lived enough life to really see things play out so much more. But I remember feeling very interested in it. And I actually did my senior thesis in college was on marriage and communication. And so I remember feeling growing up like I didn't really see a lot of communication, like deep communication modeled. And so a lot of things were swept under the rug and you just didn't talk about things. And so I would say when I first recognized I had, I guess I would call it at that point, like not, okay, like for example, and when I started dating Taylor, who became my husband, I met him my freshman year of college. And if anything bothered me, I was told to not talk about things because, you don't want the person to leave. You know what I mean? Like that was kind of what I was modeled growing up. So I would keep a lot of my stuff inside because of fear of basically abandonment if I actually spoke my needs. And so I remember with Taylor, he was a game changer. And this is what's interesting too. When you have people in your life that are showing up in more of a secure way, he was the one who encouraged me. Like if he noticed something was wrong, he'd be like, Tamara, you could just talk to me about how you feel. Like, I'm not going to get mad. Like, I want to know, like, if something's wrong, like, I want you to talk to me about it. Like, I'm not going to leave. And I remember him just saying something so simple as that and watching through his actions and his words, like he brought that out of me and made me feel safe to be able to like say what I actually felt. And I would say I recognized that that was something that I would hold in, which would definitely be like an insecurity to not feel like I had the freedom and the safety to really express and vet for myself. So
Yeah.
I think I was probably around like 18.
Okay, so you knew pretty young that you had some insecurity and then you learned more about it in college.
Yeah. Well, and then I think through life, like we got married when I was 20 and he was 21, so we were young. And both of us would get very defensive in arguments. And I could just like spout off and then I would just shut down and dismiss. And I would go from like either or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I get very feisty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I would just get so angry. I would just like, I'm done. I'm shut off. You know what I mean? And so I think what really was like transformative for us was when we were young. And thankfully we both, had a foundation of the Lord and we had like people in our life discipling us at the time.
Yeah.
So that was huge. And if I can have the humility to remember that he is for me and to just like pause and actually just receive and listen to that, even if it's hard to hear sometimes, like really being able to like have a humbled posture to listen to someone. And that goes with like a close friend, even our children. You know what I mean? As our children are getting older, the ones that are the closest to us that see into us, like I just think it's, if we can have a growth mindset, it just is a game changer.
I love how you started with that. You just have to pause, create that space to consider, why was this upsetting for me? Or what is going on for me? And is what they're saying, aside from any trigger I might be experiencing, is there something I need to consider?
Right.
So yeah, that's so good.
So Jess, when do you feel like there was a time where you recognized, there was some insecure attachment in your life?
I think honestly, I've always been self-aware in the sense like just watching and observing myself and other people all throughout my 20s. But I would say it wasn't until like my mid 30s that I was introduced to the concepts of attachment theory and looking through that lens at why there might be some certain patterns that are showing up in me and in my husband, that are causing pain and conflict. And, it's just like, it's like oil and water. I don't understand. And so we went through a stressful season, like pregnancy with my son, Decode, and then lots of caregiving. My husband was caregiving for his father and his brother, and just a lot of giving out and stress. And that environment in our relationship brought out some of the kind of worst in us, and a lot of insecurity for me specifically, about just not having somebody show up for me. And I think my husband, in his own ways, his insecurities came out, and it was just this, it was almost like a laboratory for like, okay, when things get really, really, really hard, let's look through the microscope with attachment theory and Enneagram and
Right.
these things that were so helpful to unpack what, I mean, we're both believers. We are very submitted to Christ and just want to walk in a humility and live our lives according to all of that. But then the reality is we're also human, and we have these experiences that make us self-protect. And so then just trying to figure out, how do you unpack all that? And so that was really helpful mid 30s. And so I'm 40 now. And so it's been really a journey of about 5 years of lots of study of all this stuff. And it's very helpful.
So that can lead us in to the next question is just, why don't you go ahead and help describe for us what is secure attachment?
Sure. So we both agree that, secure attachment really is characterized by low trauma responses. So, somebody's not in reactivity all the time. They're someone who has a secure attachment, whether that was from their childhood, having secure parenting, or they've earned security through doing the work of healing their attachment style. And not that, like I said, there's not a arriving at I've healed, but that they're continuing to do the work to grow in security. So yeah, just having less of those like trauma responses running the show. And so, and when you do react, repair. Like those are the types of behaviors of a secure person. So some of the characteristics is they can see a vision of what they want to get to. They tend to have a positive perspective in conflicts and relational disagreements. They can reflect when there's been conflict, and look back on their part in that, as well as maybe something that they want to express that they need, or something of that nature. Just very mature in a lot of ways. And so they're able to also regulate their emotions and use resources and tools to like either step away, take five, maybe it's just taking a deep breath, again, not reactive, and give care. They have the ability to lean in and show affection or attune to someone else who's struggling. They have the ability to be vulnerable, being vulnerable is like opening yourself up to possibly be hurt or wounded. And they're willing, and they have the security um, to say something that is vulnerable and know that that person has a choice to meet the need or respond in a kind way, or if they don't, that it's okay even if they don't, which is a really hard thing. And then they also have the ability to at times be independent. So, and like we talked about before, they have this capacity to pause. They can stop and consider, and take time, and really put that time into thoughtful communication. Another one I love about growing in security is being curious, asking questions, assuming you don't know the answer, and wondering. I love John Gottman and his research on relationships, and building love maps is something he talks about. It's really just being curious, saying, I don't know this person 100%. I need to find out more about what's going on in their inner world. And then the last thing is just a compassion and empathy towards their partner, that knows their partner's human and knows that they make mistakes and they can forgive, and they can feel with them when they're having a hard time. Yeah, so I mean, those are just some of the characteristics of somebody who displays secure attachment.
Yeah, we did a good job talking about a lot of the characteristics. Yeah, I would say when I think about secure, I just think about they're very mindful. They're able to just be more aware of words, of body language, of just emphasizing that, having clear communication, which you kind of talked on. When I think about, like, here's a good example is I think about like in a conflict, like learning, instead of just being reactive, learning to pause for a second and really like take a minute, even if you have to come back to something in like a few minutes before you just like jump in and start an argument. Like think about how to express in a way, like your tone. Because I know if I'm talking to one of my family members and if I'm just like having this aggression in my voice with something that frustrated me, then they're going to become defensive, and then it's going to end up being an argument. Whereas if I can pause, this is something I'm trying to teach my children, but pause for a second and approach the person with just respect and asking a question, starting a conversation, not being afraid to have communication, but it's all about your tone. It's not what you say, it's how you're saying it. That's something that I've learned over the years. And I would say, just the awareness of that, and being able to have direct communication, not sweeping things under the rug or avoiding things because it's easier. Because we all know when we avoid, it all is going to end up bubbling back up in the end. So we can either tackle it with a secure behavior, being calm, not assuming the worst of somebody, but having conversation. And then, vetting for your needs. And I think that's something that you see a lot of the insecure attachments have a really hard time vetting for themselves, because either they want to, skirt away from it, or they're, fearing abandonment, or, whatever. So, when you see a secure person in a dating relationship, and, they're going to be able to have conversations. So, if they feel something or something's rubbing them the wrong way, this is important to me. These are my non-negotiables, basically. Like, I really value these things. They're important. I would appreciate if you could, like just know that about me. But then, and they'll give the person the chances. But eventually, if the person is just not meeting their needs, they have the security to be able to walk away and say, okay, I don't want to do this. I really like this person, but in the end of the day, this just isn't working. I feel like the insecure attachments, especially with anxious leaning, it's hard because they're going to want to cling on for dear life. They're not going to want to walk away from that relationship, even if it is not healthy and it's not meeting their needs.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I love that direct communication, just that when somebody can vet for their needs and be clear but kind, and then if someone else doesn't respond well, you're secure enough to just let them walk away. And that is so mature. And I know, like in the South, because you and I both live in the South, it's like being direct can be taken not in a great way, especially from women. And that is, just the culture of politeness and, positivity and all this stuff. And it's like, sometimes I need to be clear and not skirt around this so that you don't misunderstand what I'm actually saying. So, and that's okay.
Right.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us some of the ways that someone would grow in security, any skills?
Yeah. So I think I don't know if you are a listener, and if you are familiar, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And I think about how, our minds, our bodies, our souls, they're all interconnected. So when we are feeling dysregulated or stressed or just shutting down, or, like our body is clearly not well, learning how to have somatic body responses that can actually release, stress. It can release trauma that's held in the body. I think breathing, there's a lot of different breathing, stretching, yoga. You could, even just go for a walk. When you feel like you're being dysregulated, put your phone down, turn off the screen. Don't just escape into a TV show, but like literally, take a walk.
Yeah.
Go enjoy being outside. Like
you and I would call that somatic processing, right?
Right.
You would agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So all of those skills and practices, things where you're tuning into your physical nervous system and how you might be responding to triggers or emotions or stress. That's what he covers in The Body Keeps the Score.
Right. And that's learning how to self-soothe. These are self-soothing. There's several self-soothing techniques, and then studying about that, like you can research more about what does that look like.
Mm-hmm.
Also being able to really, observe your thoughts. That's a skill. A lot of times people don't know, they don't sit in their own thoughts. They can distract with busyness or, throw themselves into a hobby or their work. But like slowing down and actually thinking about, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? Really observing your thoughts, learning to recognize your voice and, being able to have a growth mindset of like, I want to really take a minute and be introspective here, because if I can figure out what the root is going on in me, then that's where growth happens,
Mm-hmm.
Also
Yeah.
verbal processing. I don't know of a lot of people, but for me, like I'm a huge verbal processor. So when I am actually putting voice to how I'm feeling, um, that helps me get it, the somatic part, it gets it out of my body, and I'm able to hear myself. And journaling is another way you can process in a nonverbal way, but you're still getting it out on paper. And then that's a great time for self-reflection, just the overall emotional awareness, um, and being able to allow yourself the permission to know that this is healthy, this is good. Like I want
Mm-hmm.
to work on these things because this is bettering me as a person, not only for myself, but for the people around me.
Yeah. Awesome. So do you have any tips that are specific to relationships? And so you mentioned all these things where I see that as like a lot of those things benefit a relationship, but they're more yourself. But is there anything specific to relationships?
I think like with relationships, I think one of the most important things just goes back to communication. I
Mm-hmm.
think communication is just so vital, because if you can learn how to just have proper communication, it's just amazing how just that one thing alone is a game changer. Because when
Mm-hmm.
people are harboring things inside, or you're so expressive about it that you're, spouting off at somebody in such disrespect, it's like that's going to either make them very defensive and they're not going to hear you. They're going to shut down because they're going to go in self
Mm-hmm.
defense mode, or, the opposite, where you're holding it all in and you're not.
Yeah.
So that person really doesn't even know what's actually going on inside you. And so learning how to have proper communication where you can kindly, calmly be able to talk about how you're feeling with the other person in a way that's not going to be, accusing and or judgmental of them. But if I enter into the conversation and I have a sense of love for this person and well-being for this person, the way that I'm showing up and communicating, that is going to be felt. So
Mm.
I think like just that alone is a game changer. Um,
Yeah.
and people are able to really hear you and like they feel that from you. So
Mm-hmm.
they're going to actually be able to listen a lot more well, like not be defensive and be like, oh, okay, this person, like they really care about me.
Yeah.
And so it just really helps open the channels for harmony and acceptance and understanding.
Mm. So good.
So moving on to the anxious preoccupied, Jess, can you go ahead and help describe for us what is anxious preoccupied attachment?
Yeah. So when we talk about trauma and we talk about um, attachment breaks in trust and things like that, the anxious preoccupied person is really characterized by this fawning response, which some people don't know that term, but it's like appeasing or prioritizing others' needs over your own and constantly kind of scanning other people for whatever emotions they're having so that you can try to like fix it. And so there, you hear in my describing that there's an anxiety that comes out in trying to prevent others from either leaving you or being upset with you, that sort of a thing. So the characteristics that would most readily, describe somebody who has that attachment style, that insecure style, is, uh, being very compliant in relationships. I'm just making sure you're happy with me. And then they're hyper vigilant to others' feelings and maybe less so of their own. So they're really focused on um, attuning to others, but maybe not looking inward. Um, Really, what kind of begins this insecure style is inconsistency. So you might have a parent who when you were small that was really attuned some of the time, but then they were busy with work other times. And so you would get your needs met and feel very safe and secure some of the time, but then it was just intermittent, and often you didn't know when the next time was going to be. And so you learned to very quickly latch on to other people's attention. I mean, that's a big characteristic of anxious preoccupied is I need to keep their attention so that they can meet my needs and stay attuned to me. Because when I lose their attention and they're off who knows where, I don't know that they're going to show up for me. And so, yeah, just I think having this rigidity about constantly trying to either fix it or be on guard against the next time they might leave is that common feeling of this insecure style. They would struggle with self-regulation, so the ability to self-soothe, like you mentioned. I know in my story, a lot of my 20s were characterized by this anxious kind of posture of trying to make sure nobody was unhappy with me, and just that feeling of like I can never do enough. And so much of it's my perception. It's self-created, not actually what others feel about me. And then the last thing I'll mention is self-abandonment. I mean, we talked about one of the first episodes, self-compassion. So self-abandonment would be like the flip side of that is when you are tuned into yourself and you know what you need and you can express what you need, you're showing yourself self-compassion. But self-abandonment is dropping whatever you need and going for taking care of other people. So this would be like your classic codependency in relationships where you're just maybe enabling other people's bad behavior, or it could even be addictions, or I mean, it could be emotional abuse or things like that people are not treating you well and you don't see it. You're just constantly giving. So that self-abandonment is important to recognize that to become secure, that has to stop. You're worth paying attention to, you're worth attuning to.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if you have anything else you want to share about the anxious preoccupied characteristics, and then tell us maybe some of the wounds from childhood that might have began this style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think you really touched on it really well when you talked about they are so fearful of being abandoned and left, and they will try anything, even hang on to something that's really unhealthy for them. And I think a lot of times they are also like they have a mindset of like seeing like hopeful, like seeing the good, and so
Mm-hmm.
they can end up allowing really bad behavior or staying in something for too long that is ending up being detrimental for them.
Mm-hmm.
So like learning for them to learn like, no, I am worthy of someone treating me well and showing up for me. And I think when we can learn how to show up for ourselves, that's the first step, is looking at yourself as, like I know I'm a good, catch. Like I know, like, having confidence, like having a abundant mindset, not a scarcity mindset of like, it's okay if, I'm dating this person and, it doesn't work out. There's other people that could be a better fit. Like this isn't the only, like, I don't have to hang on to this for dear life and force something to work if it's not working or they're not treating me well.
Yeah.
Like knowing when to walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, when you look at the wounding of that, like, I feel like for someone to feel like they're not going to get better, or they have to stay in this, holding with this, situation that might not be good for them. I think like if you were to scale back and look at the wounding, a lot of times it's, I'm not good enough. Like I just said, it's having more of a scarcity mindset of like, I'll maybe I'll never feel this way about someone again, or I'm afraid, like to let this person go. But really it's like, I think there's a deeper feeling if you were to scale back of like, looking for validation from your partner, looking for them to fill the needs and self-soothe because you aren't capable of doing it, yourself yet. Looking too much to their partner to complete, you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they don't have like no one. And I think that's where growing and understanding that no one can truly complete you. I mean, it's not the Jerry Maguire, thing that you hear about, like, you complete
Mm-hmm.
me. Well, no, the person adds a lot of joy and goodness, is a great addition to your life,
Yeah.
but like no one to put the pressure on, no one to complete you.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I think another thing you can see in the anxious preoccupieds is this like need to fix others, and being able to like, have the wounded winged bird who, you want to like save and rescue, and like, well, my love will be enough to change this person. Like, you know what I mean? And it's like, it just goes back to both people, need to be in a place where they've done, some self work to be able to
Mm-hmm.
show up in a safe, secure way into a relationship. And I think that is what, it's like the key in avoiding people who've had trauma, because we all have had some big T, little t traumas in our life. Like, no one had perfectly attuned parents.
Yeah.
No one is 100% secure. But I think the key is doing the work first. Like, I have one of my really close friends, she ended up marrying this guy. He's an incredible husband to her. But he had, before they were together, in his early 20s, he had met the Lord, started growing spiritually. He had done a lot of work on himself. He was self-aware. So by the time that he met her and they were together and had their dating relationship and their marriage, like, they both had trauma in different ways. But because they were both aware and they had had time to do some of like that work, they, have had a strong marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not perfect, no marriage is, and they have grown a lot, with each other, and there's been a lot of conflict they've had to work through because they're opposites on everything, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the key, is like, it's just people have to have the awareness and to do some of the work, because if you can come and be a healthier version of yourself with the self-awareness, therefore you will be able to have a better relationship with someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what are some of those things when it comes to relating to others that you would suggest for the style, as I mean,
Yeah.
you said a lot of good things already, but
Mm-hmm.
anything else come to mind in those relationships?
I think it's learning how to focus on self-care practices, understanding how to also know your self-worth,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the insecure attachments have a low self-esteem. If you were to like break it down, there's a low sense of self-worth. So understanding like,
Mm-hmm.
God sees you, knows you fully, and loves you. And it's not about performing. It's who you are as a person. Like, you're worthy to receive love. You're worthy to give love. Learning how to be able to set boundaries, learning how to communicate your needs clearly, learning how to have self-regulation techniques, and just being able to manage anxiety, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding, you can have independence, and allow love and connection, in tandem with being able to still have autonomy and independence, and learning how to
Mm-hmm.
hold both of those things in a balanced way. But that takes, it takes growth, for people to get to that place. But I
Mm-hmm.
think, looking at life as like eagerly wanting to learn, like eagerly wanting to like better yourself. And
Yeah.
it's exciting, when you think about that, because there's so much breakthrough that happens in someone when you have a growth mindset and you're like, no, I
Mm-hmm.
want to face this stuff, because I don't want to shy away from these things because this might be hard. Like, this is where the growth happens. Life gets so much better
Mm-hmm.
in my internal world and my peace. When I'm at peace with myself, therefore, then I'm able to be at peace with those around me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I just want to echo all the great things that you shared. We're going to get into some of these deeper dive episodes in the following episodes. We'll go deep into anxious preoccupied, and then dismissive avoidant, and then fearful avoidant also. So each of these are going to be like a longer episode on them. But But yeah, I think just that when you said the I don't need someone to complete me sort of thing, and just remembering, that God is the one that is giving us our full security with all of these styles, and that although we can make choices to pay attention to patterns and have a growth mindset and move towards better things, better behaviors, better ways of emotionally processing and somatically processing, all that, God, he is imparting, these regulatory and very peaceful, secure feelings to us. It's a gift. So just keeping that in mind. So Tamara, will you explain? Oh, sorry, I jumped way ahead. Sorry, you asked me the next question.
Okay. So Jess, can you go ahead and describe for us what dismissive avoidant attachment is?
Yeah. So this attachment style is characterized by kind of the trauma response of freeze. It could be flight as well, but this sense that I'm overwhelmed and I'm going to emotionally detach when I'm overwhelmed by emotions. That would have been early on. They learned that's how they cope, is to avoid. So, when it comes to emotions, they're going to have this sense of numbness. Even though maybe in the beginning they might be triggered and then the emotions are high, they will more quickly go to shut down. And then have almost low somatic or bodily sensations in conflict. So, your classic stonewaller or somebody who's just like, are you in there? Are you listening to what I'm saying? That's because they're overwhelmed. It's not like they don't care about you, which I think some people think. They're just shutting down because their bodies learn to do that so young when emotions get high. And then obviously feeling lonely and disconnected would be a common trait. They also learn to be very independent. So hyper independence and valuing space and creating space in relationships to not need anybody would be a really common thing for a dismissive avoidant. So, withdrawing, going off by themselves. Then, like I mentioned, when there's conflict, emotions become overwhelming. So they're going to sidestep confrontations or dismiss other people's needs, maybe, make it seem like it's not a big deal, because if it's a big deal, then there's something might be wrong with them. And feeling like something's wrong with you when somebody kind of has a defectiveness wound is just, it's overwhelming. And so you want to defend against that and either minimize it or like get away from it. So like I said, they're more aware of just facts and information. And so when somebody gives a bid for connection or states a need, they may completely miss it altogether or forget about it. And yeah, just really just worry about themselves. Like that can be such a common coping thing, is that I have enough just with myself. I can't manage everybody else. So that would be the exact opposite in that way of the anxious preoccupied. So you can imagine those two in a relationship together, how different and how confusing that might be. And I think a fear of closeness, so intimacy and vulnerability, create a sense of emotional demand, which then overwhelms. So they really fear that and kind of create that space and distance. And then just that overwhelming long for peace and harmony. They kind of learn that getting space from people is the best way to do that. So, they feel at peace when they're by themselves. They need that. They also really just need that to self-regulate. And co-regulation is something they never really learn, to go get a hug or to spend time with somebody you care about or to talk about your feelings. Those would not have been skills they learned. So peace is being alone. So yeah, that's what I would say. If you have anything to add on the dismissive avoidant.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that again, if you were to scale back and look at their childhood wounds, I mean, a lot of times, dismissive avoidance, they could even say like, well, I came from like a really good family. My parents came to all my, sports games. They were provided for me. They were always there for me, you know, this kind of stuff. But it's really just thinking more of like from like the emotional space of what they learned or observed, or, you know, like just not being shown about feelings, learning how not to really observe feelings. And, you know, it could be, you know, even parents from like the best intention, you know what I mean? But like, you know, you think about parents who had multiple kids and they, you know, say, you know, a little boy, you know, scratched his leg, you know, and fell down, you know, that parent might not be able to be in a space to attune properly to that. So
Mm-hmm.
that kid just is like, well, no one's really paying attention to me. I'm in all this pain. And, you know, I just have to deal with it myself. And so they learn, you know, even indirectly, that I have to handle my own stuff. And then, you know, a lot of times I have noticed they have a lot of a defective wound of feeling like I'm not good enough. They're very, very sensitive to criticism because they already feel like they're not good enough. So then it makes them feel even more inadequate if someone is saying, hey, you're not doing this for me,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that type of thing. They're like, well, I can't do anything right. And, you know, they already walk around with this wound already. And then, you know, just feeling like they're being ignored or their feelings don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Their presence doesn't matter. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely have seen that in a lot of the, you know, just different couples that I've coached, you know, to have oftentimes it is the husband, it's not always. Like we haven't really talked about this, but you can be any gender and be any of these attachment styles. Even though there's a little bit of a stereotype that your dismissive avoidant is like mostly men. But you know, and I have seen a lot of men with this because, you know, you look at the emotions and
Mm-hmm.
how the culture will say like, buck it up, don't worry
Yeah.
about it, you know, don't cry, boys don't cry, you know, that kind of lends itself to that dismissive uh, attachment wound,
Yeah.
right? Um,
100%. Yeah.
when it comes from the parents,
Yeah.
especially.
And
So
just
yeah.
culture, just society in general. I feel like men have, I mean, even if they're not technically a dismissive avoidant, I do feel like men, a lot of times in general, because of societal norms, men can tend to lean on more of an avoidant side of a spectrum because they are just taught from a young age, like, you know, men don't cry, toughen up, you gotta, you know what I mean? So like they've heard this modeling from
Mm-hmm.
society, or even their fathers, you know, they watch their fathers,
Right.
and their behavioral responses to things shut down or just, you know, have these kind of responses. So they learn from what they see.
Mm.
Um, and I think it's hard because so many times, like, we're just not even aware, you know, like so many
Mm.
people don't talk about these things, you know, even in
Mm-hmm.
school, like they don't have classes where you're learning about attachment style in high school.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
just
They
this
should.
like, I know it would be so life transforming. I mean, I feel like it's as important as a personal
Yeah.
finance class, but you know,
Mm-hmm.
people don't really talk a lot about this. And so we end up with these wounds and we're not really how to put a language on them. And I think it takes a while for us to even really start to see our patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, tell us what you think some tips for security in relationships would be for a dismissive avoidant.
yeah. I think it's learning how to practice vulnerability. I think it's being able to be able to have, you know, in order to have deeper connections with partners, I think a dismissive avoidant is going to have to learn how to be able to have a space because they do value so much of their autonomy and their independence and control that learning how to hold space that is actually strength also to let love and connection in. And when
Mm-hmm.
you have the right partner and you have a good, secure partner, that person will actually lend strength to your life and make you a better person. So life is better holding space for a loving, good partner,
Mm-hmm.
because you know you end up encouraging and inspiring each other to be the best versions of yourself when you're both
Mm-hmm.
in a healthy mindset. Not looking as like, you know, I have to be safe in my independence. That's where it's peaceful. That's where it's safe. It's actually like, no, it's actually, you know, really discounting a lot of who you could ultimately be, if you would allow love in with someone who truly sees you, who knows you, who you can have real, honest, open communication and allow someone to see, your strengths, weaknesses, and those deep places. Because it's just so, as a human, we're designed to want connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so allowing that connection is very healing, when it's with someone that truly sees you, knows you, loves you, accepts you, understands you. That is very healing for a dismissive avoidant.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
and then I think just, learning how to have more emotional discussions. Usually when it starts to get real, or this sense of closeness, or, oh my gosh, I'm feeling so much for this person. This is scaring me. What if I lose who I am because I'm letting this person have a hold on me? Like, that can
Mm-hmm.
freak someone out. So they end up pushing away. And so I think, like, in those moments, if a dismissive avoidant could pause and internally see what's happening and be able to not give in to the fear, but be
Mm-hmm.
able to, and, even have a conversation with the person they're with of, this is how I'm feeling right now. I need to take some space. I care about you. I'm not meaning to push you away. But I need to just go have time to myself, and I love you, and I'll be back at this time. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that right there is so
Yeah.
huge. But yeah, learning how to pause and being able to not give in to the fear of, I've got to shut this down. So that's why
Mm.
it's like, security is so important, when we can get ourselves to these secure places, because,
Yeah.
yeah, be healthy.
Yeah. Repress and distract. That's what I think about when I think about the dismissive avoidant.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's their strategies, is repress and distract so that
Right.
they don't feel.
Right. And it always catches up with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, just a side note, that's why it's, not uncommon that you see a lot of the dismissive avoidance, push someone away because of fear, not because of the feelings, as the feelings were too real. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times they will end up circling back to those people once their nervous system has calmed down and they've realized, oh my gosh, this person really loved me. I really cared about them. Why did I do this? Like,
Yeah.
that's not an uncommon thing to see. Jess, can you go ahead and describe for us what is a fearful avoidant attachment?
Right. So, there are two type of avoidant people. One would be this dismissive avoidant that we just talked about, and we just laid out, basic patterns and childhood wounds for that. But for a fearful avoidant person, their trauma responses really kind of a lot of times start with the fight and then go to the flight. They oscillate between the two, often feeling conflicted between wanting closeness with their partner and then fearing being overwhelmed by their partner, whether it be their needs or their frustrations or whatever. This style has more trauma, more childhood trauma. That could have been. It doesn't have to be grand, big T traumas or traumatic events, but there was enough dysfunction and chaos in the home that they kind of just didn't really have a safety in their system, even more so than some of the other styles. That there was, maybe it was just their parents were going through mental health challenges or divorce or things like that, or they experienced abuse and neglect. Any of those things, addictions could have been present. And even if it was just for a portion of their childhood, but not the whole thing, any of those things could lead someone to this insecure style. And so some of the characteristics that are present is they experience intense emotions, but then there's this, they kind of get overwhelmed by them. Hypervigilance in situations. They might be constantly scanning for potential threats from their partner or from even friendships, maybe from their children. Anything like that is, you kind of always feel stressed, you always feel triggered, and then that first response is often anger, or it could be anxiety, but just that, like, it's intense. And so this person is often kind of enamored by the dismissive avoidant, and their sort of steady stability, even though they don't have emotional depth. There's something about that often is intriguing for somebody with fearful avoidance, especially if they lean. And it's fair to say the fear and the anxiety give them an anxious side. So, that anger or those triggers that often present in the beginning of a conflict or in insecurity can look a little bit like the anxious preoccupied, and then sometimes they'll swing to that avoidant shutdown side as well. So they really are kind of unpredictable in a lot of ways. It depends who they're with. They often are opposite of the person that they're with. Their strategies will lean opposite. Um, so they can have a desire for control, because they want to protect against those underlying fears. They tend to have a negative bias, so they're scanning for the negative constantly. They might be that person that there's just always a problem that they're complaining about, whether it be in their partner or at work or in friendships, that they're just always unhappy with somebody else for something. So just that negative bent. Again, that high somatic sensations, they are deep, deep feelers. So they also have a deep capacity for empathy. They've learned to go to the depths and the pain of their own emotions, but they can also almost feel that for other people. So they can be overwhelmed by other people's emotions. So here I am sometimes, I think back in my 20s, my husband would get angry about something that he had every right to be angry about. And maybe it had nothing to do with me. I get overwhelmed by his emotion, feeling it in my body, and it's empathy, but it's also very dysfunctional and damaging. So, like, I'm getting so overwhelmed by his anger, I want to shut that down so that I don't have to feel it. That type of a experience makes them a little bit addicted to depth and wanting to go deep and vulnerable in relationships, because that's where they can find trust and safety. So, you can imagine this person being in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant who doesn't want to go deep, doesn't want to be vulnerable, how frustrating that would be, because you find safety in vulnerability and they find safety in disconnection and self-protection. So yeah, those are just some of the characteristics that come to mind. If there's anything else that you think about with the fearful avoidance, what would you
Mm-hmm.
say?
Yeah, I just feel like it is tricky because I feel like they can swing to both sides. And I feel like as I've had time to reflect, I feel like I would be more in the fearful avoidant spectrum. Um, and yeah, it's like, it's hard because I think, you can struggle with, your too much wound, feeling overwhelmed by their own emotional intensity. Like you said, taking on other people's emotions and then how that can end up affecting their emotional regulation. Depending on what kind of friendship or relationship they're in, they can swing to being more anxious. Or if they're with more of an anxious person, they'll swing to being more of an avoidant. And yeah, it is I think the hardest of the insecure attachment, because like you said, it's like you don't really know what you're gonna get, because it can swing different ways. It's unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
um I think as far as tips for security in relationships with a fearful avoidant is learning how to just practice self-soothing techniques that we've talked about before, about managing anxiety. Just learning how to, talked about also like communicating needs clearly, kindly to partners, um, and, building trust gradually by sharing vulnerabilities and establishing boundaries. Kind of like going back to the example with, me and my husband when we first started dating. Like, I was really scared to speak up for my needs and I would kind of shut down. And it took, him in that moment being more of a secure base, allowing me and encouraging me, like, hey, I want to know how you're feeling. Like, it's okay. Like, I care
Mm-hmm.
about you. I want to know. Like, I'm not going to be mad. I'm not going to leave. And like that slowly opened me up to start sharing, to be more vulnerable. And it's funny because now he's like, oh gosh, I created a monster, because I have no problem now sharing. I've learned in time, like I have no problem, sharing and knowing how to have healthy communication and vetting for my needs, but doing it in a way that is, respectful to the other person, as well as respecting, myself. But again, it's like we've talked about, like even with the title for our Transforming Us, it's a learning of a transforming in time. We don't get there overnight.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of intention, experiences, like being kind of pushed out of our comfort zones. But in time, it's just really rewarding and very freeing when you learn just, just the self-awareness, and being able, like we've like, talk about transforming us, we're doing it as a collective together. Like, we're not alone. Like, we're
Mm-hmm.
built to have connections. We're built to walk through life not alone. And so
Yeah.
I think when we start to truly understand the beauty and the freedom, and it really breaks people of a lot of patterns and strongholds, and just like this, these things that are not even based on truth, that we hold on to,
Mm-hmm.
that are framing how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we see other people. So like, yeah, breaking through those
Mm.
preconceived things that are not really based on truth. And
Yeah.
I just feel like, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
process for sure.
Yeah, I love all that. And I love that focus on just like us as like this one unit,
Yeah.
Now, whether that's an us like a partnership or, relationship, or it's just us representing any connection with any other person, that type of stuff needs to be transformed on an attachment level, personality level, like, even just the body keeps the score level,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that we process things in our body. We are embodied humans that show up that way, and that because we live in a fallen world, it's like we those things do need to be sanctified and transformed.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to highlight something from the fearful avoidant that we didn't mention, is that they have this like betrayal wound,
Mm-hmm.
and that there was some form of a trust break
Right.
in a parent relationship as a child. So they are very sensitive to anything that might be perceived. And again, with negative bias, a lot of things become a betrayal. It could just be like, you didn't take out the trash. Like, it
Right.
could be much bigger type of betrayal, like you're texting your ex, or it could be like just very small things like, I can't depend on you, I can't trust you. And
Right.
so just watching for that, if you're like not sure where you fall in terms of where you lean in the attachment spectrum, if betrayal is huge for you and just like you get mad easily by people wronging you or feeling like you can't trust them, that might be something to pay attention to for this style. So,
I feel like a lot of times, just to touch on, I feel like, um, with the fearful avoidant, um, generally those are typically people would fall in that category, like you said, with betrayal. And I think it also pairs back to like abuse. Like a lot of times, if there's been abuse, or neglect, that is where you'll see that person generally land in the fearful avoidant, which goes back to, like you
mm-hmm.
said, it's the betrayal.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are those very common, I can't trust the people that were tasked to take care of me when there's abuse and neglect. And, it can also, yeah, just it gets complicated
Mm-hmm.
because then there's other types of trust breaks that the parent actually did nothing wrong, but it was the way that the child perceived this situation, that they weren't safe.
Right.
And then they put their parents in this category of, yeah, but they didn't protect me. Well, maybe
Right.
they didn't know,
Right.
maybe there was something they didn't know was happening to you.
Right.
But as a 5-year-old, you don't think like that. So,
Right.
yeah.
So Jess, why don't you go ahead and tell us what is coming up?
So coming up for Transforming Us is we'll have 3 deep dive episodes on each insecure style. So we touched on them, it seemed comprehensive today, but the reality is it's a very complex thing to learn about. So if you want to go with us on a journey of deep diving into attachment theory, the next 3 episodes are definitely going to be for you on first the anxious preoccupied, and then the second one will be dismissive avoidant, and then the third will be fearful avoidant. And then we'll move on to other types of patterns after that. So thank you for joining us, and we appreciate you all just hanging with us for this. It's fun.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Transforming Us podcast. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation and that you found it helpful. If you loved what you heard, we would really appreciate if you would take a moment and leave us a 5-star review and rating. Your support helps us reach more listeners like you.
And also don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more relationship content. Then if you're looking to take your growth to the next level, check out our coaching services and groups at transformingus.org.
We're here to help you transform your patterns and enjoy more secure relationships.
Until next time, in the words of Raoul Shane, you do not need to do big things. Just do small things in a big way. Then transformation will follow you.